From a century of centuries to 1,000 career centuries, from the Rockets' reoccurring absences all the way to the first ever Chinese world champion, this has been another memorable snooker season filled with sensational highs and disappointing lows. And in this video, you and I are going to go through and recap the whole season. But to do so, we need to rewind the clock all the way back to the very start of July 2024. Labour had just ended a 14-year Tory reign here in the UK, and it was only fitting that arguably snooker's biggest ever Labour fan, Ali Carter, won the opening ranking tournament of the season by beating Jackson Page in the final of the Championship League. Then just a couple of weeks later, I was on possibly the biggest come down of my life after England's Euro final heartbreak after a 2-1 loss to Spain. But one English sportsman who rarely lets you down in a final is Judd Trump, who got his season up and running by landing the Shanghai Masters for the very first time. Judd also made 10 centuries across 4 matches that he won in that tournament, setting himself up nicely for a bid to make a century of centuries for the second time in his career. Moving into August, and we got our first matchup of the season between the world number 1 Judd Trump and the world champion Kyren Wilson, and spoiler alert, this was far from the only big match that they played over the next 8 months or so. Judd was looking to go 2 for 2 and land back-to-back titles to kickstart his season in the perfect possible way. But Kyren, who has a remarkably strong record in multi-session matches against Judd Trump, came out a 10-8 winner to land the Xi'an Grand Prix. The tour then moved to Saudi Arabia for the country's first ever full ranking event. Plenty of money was pumped into the tournament, and despite World Snooker desperately trying to get every player to big up the event as much as they possibly could do, the crowds did leave a lot to be desired. However, we did get one of the matches of the season in the final as Mark Williams missed this red when looking on course to land a £500,000 bonus. Yet it was Judd Trump who produced a pretty spectacular clearance himself to take the prize and catapults himself even further up the rankings. At this point, it was 3 finals from 3 events for Judd, and he wasn't done there. September then rolled into town, and as the weather got colder, it was a time of year when it feels a little bit more like the season really gets going in the snooker world, and nothing warmed up this Neil Robertson's fans' heart more than by seeing the Aussie win his first title in over 2 years when he beat Wu Yizha to win the English Open in a final that got much more nervy than it looked like becoming when Neil led 8-2. That result boosted Neil's top 16 hopes, having started the season all the way down at 27 in the world, but he still had work to do to get to the Masters. The English Open also proved to be quite the tournament for John Higgins, who made his 1,000th career century during his 4-3 loss to Mark Allen, becoming only the second player behind O'Sullivan to achieve that landmark. However, that loss also meant that John Higgins slipped out of the top 16 for the first time in 30 years, with question marks now being raised about the Wizards' ability to still be able to mix it with the big boys. Oh, did I mention John Higgins couldn't live with the top players anymore? Well, never mind, because the very next week, John catapulted himself back into the top 16 with a run to the British Open final where he lost out to Mark Selby, who after having a difficult time of things the season prior with his mental health, looked to be flying in the right direction once again, having ended his own 18-month trophy drought. There was also a sense of deja vu as Judd Trump became the third man to make 1,000 centuries, 8 days after John Higgins had achieved the same feat, and he also achieved it in a loss against Mark Allen. The tour then went all the way back to the Far East for the Wuhan Open, and here was where we found our first real surprise winner of the season. Xiao Guodong had spent the best part of 15 years as your typical journeyman professional, but produced the form of his life to beat the likes of Shaun Murphy, Barry Hawkins and Kyren Wilson before defeating his compatriot Xi Jiawei to land his first ever ranking title, and much like Zhang Anda the year before, he used this as a springboard for the rest of the season. Now, when it comes to the Northern Ireland Open, betting on Judd Trump is usually the go-to tip for this tournament. He had won 4 of the previous 8 renditions of this tournament, so when he reached the final, it looked to be a foregone conclusion. But that final served up part 2 of the matchup between Judd and Kyren, and after winning a tight encounter in China, Kyren this time completely dismantled the world number 1 to land his second title after claiming a maiden world title the season before. It had so far been a season of redemption stories, with both Mark Selby and Neil Robertson already ending their own trophy droughts, and next to do so was Ding Junhui, who won his first ranking title since the 2019 UK Championship, and done so in front of his home fans in Nanjing. And after a season where the usual suspects seemed to be going missing, nature in the snooker world seemed to be finally healing once again. When you get to the Champion of Champions, you know you are in the main stage of the snooker season now. Ronnie O'Sullivan had been a serial winner of this event, but he had been stuttering after making a pretty strong start to the campaign. And then when he went 3-0 up in the first round, it looked like business as usual. But he could then only look on as the ever-improving Xiao Guodong came back to beat him. And Zhao would then go on to make it all the way to the final before losing to Mark Williams, which meant that yet another season had included a title going to at least one of the class of 92. And then we were into the first Triple Crown event of the season. Now, after seeing Neil Robertson safely negotiate the qualifiers, my joy was short-lived as I saw him draw Judd Trump first round, which was already the third time the pair would meet this season. O'Sullivan also crashed out in the first round against Barry Hawkins, and this would be the last ranking event snooker fans would see the Rocket participate in until the World Championship. Earlier in the month of November, Donald Trump had been elected President of the United States for the second time, but back here in the UK, Judd Trump would go on to land his second United Kingdom Championship. It was now 3 titles for Judd this season, who has also enacted some revenge on Kyren Wilson by beating him in the semi-finals. But I wouldn't have believed it if you had told me at that point that would be the last title Judd would pick up this season. Then, despite the UK Championship finishing on the 1st of December, the snooker calendar still managed to cram in 3 more full tournaments before Christmas. Tom Ford got the festive season rolling by turning around a pretty horrendous first half of the season by winning the snooker shootout, which was his first full ranking title of his career, although I am still too stuck in my ways to consider this tournament as anything more than a fun little invitational tournament. Surprise winner number 2 of the season came in the form of another player from China. This time it was Li Paifan who shocked the bookmakers to win the Scottish Open, having never previously made it past the last 16 of any professional tournament. Unfortunately for his fellow young compatriot Wu Yize, it was now 2 losses from 2 finals in a matter of a few months, but he was continuing to rise ever higher up the snooker rankings. And 2024 came to an end back in Saudi Arabia for the second instalment of the Invitational Riyadh Championship, which defending champion Ronnie O'Sullivan decided was worth his time to attend. Luca Broussel, who had completely gone off the grid since his world title in 2023, managed to pick up a couple of notable results over Mark Williams and Kyren Wilson, but it was Mark Allen who picked up his first trophy of the season on the back of several semi-final appearances. Heading into 2025, and London was calling for the top 16 snooker stars as the Masters got underway in Ali Pali. Record Masters champion O'Sullivan pulled out 2 days before he was due to kick off the tournament, so Neil Robertson was given an unexpected entry into an event he had won twice before, and pulled off a Houdini act by recovering from 5-1 down to beat John Higgins in the first round. Judd Trump and Kyren Wilson met yet again, and it was Kyren who got the upper hand in their semi-finals to lead the head-to-head between them 3-1 in the season. But it was a tournament that ultimately belonged to Shaun Murphy, who waved his magic wand to produce a pretty flawless display to land a second Masters title. After royally messing up a 1-4-7 chance in the quarterfinals, he went on to put that memory to bed in the very next round, before beating Wilson to the winning post in the final. However, without any ranking points accredited to this tournament, he still found himself in a precarious position of possibly having to qualify for the World Championship. Moving to the ever-popular German Masters, where the final was graced by both the UK Championship and the Masters runners-ups, so one of them was in for even more heartbreak. Whilst Hawkins was quietly going about his own business, Kyren Wilson and his management team continued to prove that he was a personable guy, so get off his back. And that worked too, as he got the better of a deciding throw to pick up title number 3 of the season. Going into the Welsh Open, and after just winning the glorified practice competition of the Championship League, the version that isn't a ranking event, unlike the one at the start of the season with the exact same name and format that is, well, it was Mark Selby who, after coming in on such a high from winning such a prestigious event, landed his second ranking event of the season in Llandudno by beating Stephen Maguire, and it was around about this time when I was fully ready to bet everything I owned on the Jester winning a 5th world title. Remember John Higgins, guys? The man who dropped out of the top 16 early in the season and hadn't won a full ranking tournament for 4 years? Well, he decided enough was enough and came to Yushan in China to remind everyone that he still has plenty of life in the old dog still, as he beat Joe O'Connor in the final to land ranking title number 32 of the career. And it was around about this time in the season when I was considering betting everything I owned on John Higgins winning a 5th world title. Moving now into the 3 players tournaments to sign off the season before everyone moved to Sheffield, and for the first time the World Grand Prix was held outside of the UK and not available on ITV. But I was sat here remembering the good times as Robertson landed his 2nd title of the season, and after Stuart Bingham had opened up about the issues he had been suffering both on and off the table, the Aussie really said, "Yeah, that's really sad mate, but here's a nice 10-0 loss in a major final to help cheer you up." The ITV crew were then back for the Players' Championship, and would you believe it, Kyron Wilson and Judd Trump had only gone and decided to play each other in another bloody final. After losing 2 finals to the world champion, Judd would have been thinking, it surely can't go on like this.
It can.
Never mind. Kyron continued his multi-session domination over the world number 1 to claim his 4th title of the season, becoming only the 3rd first-time world champion to do so. And those pesky little snooker gods must have been beginning to sweat about that Crucible curse, right? And then the penultimate tournament of the season took us to Manchester for the Tour Championship, and the men who I was so convinced would win the World Championship, either Mark Selby or John Higgins, met in this final. And surely this was just a sign of things to come in Sheffield. Anyway, the pair served up a bit of a classic as Higgins came back from 8-5 behind, having just lost 7 frames in a row. I know we joke about the class of 92, but genuinely, when are they going to retire? Because it's becoming borderline unfair for the rest of the tour at this point. And so then we made it to the home of the sport. Who would end the season on the biggest high possible? Could Judd Trump add the tag of world champion to his world number 1 status? Could Kyron Wilson beat the Crucible curse, despite doing everything in his power to piss off the snooker gods even more? Would Selby and Higgins show why I put so much faith into them? Or could maybe O'Sullivan come out of nowhere and take a record 8th World Championship crown? Well, of course, it was none of the above, and in a year where a record 10 Chinese players attended the Crucible, it seems more likely than ever before that the country would finally have a World Snooker Champion. And that prophecy was fulfilled by 28-year-old Xiao Xingtong, who won 9 matches and 111 frames over both the qualifiers and the main event to achieve the dream of a nation. Pushing aside the mumblings of controversy around his ban from the sport 2 years ago, Zhao's ability to pot anything that was round was extraordinary, and he will forever be in the sport's history books. And that is a recap of the 2024-25 snooker season. Thanks for watching.